and welcome back to my channel, Moonlit Books. My name is Kristen, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of March. So I read 6 books in the month of March, and I genuinely really enjoyed all of them. They were all different young adult books. I didn't read any contemporaries this month. If you saw my February wrap-up, you will know that I read quite literally nothing but contemporaries in the month of February. So I did stray a little bit from some of the books that I more typically read, and I read a couple books that honestly I wouldn't consider my typical genre of choice, but we'll dive into that. So yeah, let's just get started with the first book. The first book that I finished in March was technically Shadow and Bone, but I'm going to talk about that whole series at the end of this video, so I'm going to start with the second book that I finished in March, and that was Our Dark Duet by V.E. Schwab. And this book is the second book in the This Savage Song duology, and I read This Savage Song I think quite literally in like 2015. It had been 5 years since I read that book before I picked this one up, and I'm just so glad that I did finally read this book because I absolutely loved it. I didn't really know what to expect going in because I had a very vague memory of what the first book was about, but wow, I genuinely loved this book so much. So the basic premise of This Savage Song is that we are in more or less a dystopian United States of America. I don't know exactly how far in the future it's set, but we are now in this society where when people sin, it creates a monster. So first of all, let me just say that I think the premise of this world and the creation of these monsters is just such a cool concept. Like, I genuinely enjoyed learning about the world and these monsters so much because unlike typical monster books, I felt like they really were given a meaning and a reason to exist rather than just being like, ah yes, we have these fantastical monsters. I really liked that they were born of sin, and any act of violence that happened in the book, you immediately knew that like a new monster was going to be born of it. This duology follows 2 main characters, August and Kate, and they are the children of the respective leaders of the town that they're living in. And Kate's father kind of bribes people into paying him in return for protection from these monsters. He has kind of become the overlord of the monsters in a way, and they do as he commands. And August's father, on the other hand, wants to work together to kind of rid the world of these monsters and figure out what we can do with like a more civil tactic, and he's kind of like the leader of like the lower class, I guess you would say, and Kate's father is the leader of the upper class, kind of more higher in power. And a lot of that is all developed and gone through in the first book, and in the second book, Our Dark Duet, we are kind of on the brink of a war between the monsters and the humans, and there's just so much that happens in this book, and I just found it so beautifully written and poetic. To be completely honest, that is all that I can really say about this duology, and especially the second book, without giving away a bunch of spoilers, because obviously a lot of what happens in this second book is a direct result of how the first book ends, so I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. But this is also the first V.E. Schwab book that I have read since I read This Savage Song. They're the only 2 books by her that I have read, and I'm genuinely like so excited to know that she has so many books out that I haven't read because I really resonate with her writing style, and I'm very excited to get to read more of her work going forward. So yeah, if you are into monsters and just like incredible world building, and Kate and August are just genuinely such good characters, and it is so interesting to see how they evolve throughout the course of, in particular, this book, but knowing where they started in the first book to where they ended at the end of this book is just like, they grow so much from where they started, and I love that. I love good character growth. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this one, so let's move on to the next. So the next book that I read is also a sequel book in a duology, and that is The Rose and the Dagger by Renee Ahdieh. This book is the sequel to The Wrath and the Dawn, which I actually just read in January, so I talk more about that in my January wrap-up as well. This book This book was so good, and I genuinely enjoyed this one, I think better than the first one, just because this one had more fantastical elements. In the first book you get a little like taste of the magic that's going to happen, but this book really brings it out and you really fully get to understand like more about the magic system and the magic that exists in this universe. I don't think I said this yet. This is a YA fantasy duology, and it is a retelling based off of the Middle Eastern folk tales 1001 Nights. And I actually didn't know that going into the first book, and while I genuinely don't know much about those folk stories, I found it really interesting to then know that this was actually based in some sort of existing folklore. So again, like with our Dark Duet, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the first book and just like a general premise of the series because I don't want to give away any crazy spoilers for the second book. So the general premise of this story is that in the kingdom that this takes place in, there is who we come to first meet as a mad boy king who has taken a new bride every night for the past, at this point I think we're probably up to like 50, 60, 70 days. He has been taking a new bride every night and she is dead before the sun rises. So our main character, Sharzad, one of her best friends is one of these girls who ends up getting killed by the king. So she makes a deal with herself that she is going to go into the palace under the guise of being his new bride and then kill him. She then, of course, falls in love with him because that's just like the next logical plot point, I feel like. So she then ends up falling in love with the king, and it kind of starts an uprising because the king up to this point has been killing all of these brides, and it's a little bit of like, what makes her different? Like, so many other people's daughters have died and she gets to live, and it kind of is the spark that starts an uprising that was already on the horizon, but once this has continued to happen, it kind of lights a fire beneath it, and it really starts to motivate people on the outside to come together and figure out a way to overthrow the murdering, crazy king. It just genuinely held my attention really well, and I really just enjoyed all of the characters, and this one is also told from multiple point of views, which is something that I personally really enjoy. I kind of get tired of a single point of view, especially in like a fantasy sort of book. I prefer to hear from everyone what's happening. I just think that it makes it way more interesting when you can see what all of the characters are thinking. So yeah, that is The Rose and the Dagger by Renee Ahdieh. The next book that I read in March was Wilder Girls by Rory Powers. The genre of this book is feminist horror, which is a genre that I have never read before, and I did quite enjoy it. This story follows a boarding school on an island off the coast of Maine, I believe, and they have been trapped there. At the start of this story, I think they've been there for at least a couple of years, living with this thing called the tox. And what this is it has started to mutate all of the animals and the plants and the girls that are living on this island. So they are living in seclusion on this island, and they are getting supplies brought to them every couple of weeks by the US Navy, but they don't have any sort of contact with the outside world. They're being told that the CDC and the Department of Health are working on some sort of a cure for the ailments that they have. As I read more and more into this book, it became one of those books where I just wanted the characters to succeed. I just wanted them to get to a point where they weren't struggling anymore because they just went through so much in the course of this book. It was also one of those books where I didn't know who to trust ever. I didn't know if I could trust the narrators. I didn't know if I could trust any of the people around them. I was just constantly on the edge of my seat waiting to see what was going to happen next because I never knew what was going to go on. I never knew who was going to act in what ways. It was very much like an unreliable narrator situation, but also just an unreliable everyone situation. It also has a sapphic storyline, so two of the girls kind of end up discovering these feelings for each other throughout the course of the book, which honestly was quite a relief of a plot line to have, because without that I think it would have just been way too heavy all the time. I mean, it was still heavy even in those aspects, but it was nice to have a little bit of a glimmer of romance. I also just want to put it out there as like a trigger warning kind of for this one, that if you don't like blood and guts and gore, don't read this book. Just don't do it. It is very gory and very descriptive in its gore, so I'll leave you with that information. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this one. If you are looking for a twisty, turny, thriller type horror academia shenanigans, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. And now we have reached the final 3 books in this wrap-up, and that is the entirety of the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Honestly, I think I'm going to do a whole video talking about the Shadow and Bone trilogy, especially because the Netflix series is coming out in the month of April. I really want this to have like some more light shown on it than I would typically give in a wrap-up, so I'm just gonna do a quick little touch on this. I also feel like pretty much everyone in the world has read or is currently reading these books right now, just because, like I said, it is being adapted into a Netflix show. So if you are a lover of like your typical YA fantasy, I would pick these up. Like if you read The Hunger Games and Divergent, and like if you were a part of that group of books when they were first coming out, this to me felt very similar to those and was kind of nostalgic in a way, even though I had never read it before. They just feel very homey and like easy YA. Like if you have never read really any sort of fantasy before, or you're like hesitant to read a fantasy book, to be honest, these books might be a good place to start because they are very easy to grasp, and because they're told in the first person point of view, so you're only getting one character's thoughts, which honestly is really nice sometimes when you don't want a lot going on. I don't know, I just feel like these books are a good place to start if you have never really read fantasy before, if you want to try fantasy out for the first time. They're a very just like low-key, pretty easy read. They're pretty straightforward and easy to understand, and the magic system isn't super complicated, which I think is a plus when you are just starting out with fantasy. So just a little bit more about this book is that if you are also one of those people who are in a book for romance, this one could also be a good choice for you. It starts out with a love triangle, and then in the second book we have a little bit more of like a love square. It's just really interesting to watch the way that Alina progresses these relationships with these boys in her life. Like, to be honest, in my opinion, the relationships are maybe a little bit distracting from the main storyline. But if you are here for just like some really random relationships that maybe don't completely make sense, but they're happening anyway, this could be a good place for you to start. So yeah, I feel like that is all that I'm going to say about Shadow and Bone for now. Like I said, I'm planning on doing some sort of review video just for this trilogy, so I will get more in depth on my thoughts and feelings and probably get a little bit spoilery in that video. Alright, so I think we're done now. We're gonna do the cute little book stack. We have reached the end, and here's our beautiful stack of books that I read in the month of March, and I really enjoyed all of them. They're all pretty different from each other, and I really appreciated that variation. This month it was really nice to shake it up after having read only contemporaries in February. So yeah, that is the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for being here and for watching. It would mean a lot to me if you haven't subscribed already, if you would considering subscribing to my channel. I am just so happy to be here making bookish content for you all. So thank you again for being here, and I will see you again with another video soon. Bye!